and it's about 8 messages in the series, and I titled it When I Was a Child. Now, this message is not meant to bring back all those warm, fuzzy feelings of like, oh, my baby pictures and images, but rather, even though it's addressed to both genders, it really has a leaning towards men. And it doesn't mean that leaning towards men is leaving out the women, but I know that nearly every woman I talk to would say that she wants her man to be a man. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11, the Apostle Paul writes, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child, and when I became a man, I put aside childish things." And I was just thinking of this, and I think they'll have it on the board for me as well. When I think of the word, when I was a child, I spoke. And by this, I put down this: words hardly intelligible and often unmeaningful. I spoke as a child, meaning words hardly intelligible and often unmeaningful. And children, like I had the privilege of a visit with Josiah and Jacinta and most of all Zion yesterday, okay? And what a great time it was to see them. And watching Zion begin to utter words, well, noises more so, but uttering words, and they are absolutely, in the common sense, meaningless, although I understand they express joy and happiness. And it's talking here just like this. When we act as a child, we speak words that are hardly intelligible and often unmeaning. He goes on to say, and I thought or reasoned like a child. And by thought or reason, I put down this: inconclusive and sometimes a ridiculous manner. When I was a child, I sometimes thought and reasoned like a child in the context that I sometimes can be ridiculous and inconclusive in manner. Now, I know 1 Corinthians 13 is talking about the gift of love. And if you read the whole chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, it's basically telling you this: rather than just seeking the gifts, seek God's love. In other words, you can function in your gift, but if you don't have love, you've missed it. And the Apostle Paul is trying to emphasize to the church in Corinth that in the midst of you seeking giftings, in the midst of you seeking like spiritual power or influence or authority, you've got to come back to love. Paul goes on to say, love doesn't envy. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Love forgives. Someone might say, well, how many times must I walk the humble path? As long as it is required. As long as it is required. And Paul's talking about the immaturity of the church. Because rather than talking about forgiving, and rather than talking about moving in love, and rather than talking about holding no record of wrongs, people are having tantrums, and they don't want this, but they want to boldly move in the prophetic. And then Paul's saying, we are so childish or so childlike. Well, actually, it's quite good to be childlike in the context of having childlike faith. But it's not acceptable to be childish with the immaturity of a tantrum or wanting to have things our own way. Let me go on and say this. Every single one of us, great and ordinary, famous or forgotten, enters this world traumatically and begins to perceive their surroundings through the eyes of a child. When we are born, we begin to perceive our surroundings with the eyes of a child. I remember looking at Zion just a couple of days of age, maybe a week of age, and maybe 2 weeks of age, and I was asking Jacinta and Josiah, because they're more up to date than I am, okay? When have you been told that their eyes can actually see properly and clearly? And they're talking about how long it takes. Now, being around the 3 months of age, I can see his eyes get fixed on sometimes the silliest things. It could be a light or a thing that's happening. And all of a sudden I see his head just looking. It's fixed like, wow, it's a whole new experience. So our surroundings, our world is seen through the eyes of a child. And it's during these tender years that we begin the experience of our masculinity or femininity. This is how it begins. It's in these early stages that we begin to shape or develop as to who we are as a man or as a woman. Our development is shaped by the things we encounter as children. We are defined by our parents and our relationships. We are defined by our dysfunctions in adulthood, and we're also shaped or influenced by the presence or absence of men who fathered us. In today's society, it seems to be getting worse, where we have men who are more absent fathers rather than being involved father. An absent father doesn't always mean he's not there, but it can mean he might be there but not involved there. So we learn the art of suppression early. We deeply bury the painful questions and the sensitivity that so easily bruises us. I was thinking of just now, I just finished, it's about 8:30 at night over there in Houston. And for the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of being at a particular event called Intense Men, where there's about 1,500 men. And I was communicating with some of the fellows over there and enjoying themselves, and they had a particular fellow called Bill Wilson who ministers amongst children, particularly. He's well known for ministry amongst children around the world. And I was thinking about each time I go there and I've had the chance to share how many broken men there are, from the youngest age to older age, and many times just come and weep on my shoulder because somehow they feel that they have lost out, or somehow they feel that what they have experienced from childhood has been carried into adulthood. And so they learned how to suppress it. They learned how to hold it down. And when we suppress these things, we suppress the natural creativity that springs from a probing mind as we encounter the pain of continually being told, shut up, I don't have time to listen to you. The first time I ever heard those sort of words, maybe not exactly the same, but shut up, you shouldn't be heard, probably had to do with my father's mother. And we called her Nana, okay? And there was a time where, for a little bit, my mum had to work, drop me off for my Nana, which is all fine, and I have no doubt my Nana loved me. But her thing was this. You sat down, I had this little cardboard box that my mum had gotten from her work that I'd put in my favorite toys. I was only a young fella. And I was told to sit in a chair, and she would turn on her television, and for whatever it was, I think I'll never forget that terrible noise, the beginning of an English show called Coronation Street. I mean, I hate it. Still to this day, I hate it. I think I was with her for a week, and every day she'd play. I could always remember that music, and it was dreary and yucky and ugly. You know what I mean? The streets. Mum said, do you ever want to go to England? I go, no, Coronation Street. You know what I mean? Sorry, my English friends. And I remember as a child, and she'd be saying, children should be seen and not heard. You know what I mean? Don't speak until you are spoken to. Sit in the chair and do not move. The dog had more liberties than I had. Seriously, and that's not a joke. The dog had more liberties than I had. These are things that can impress you even for a short term in how you learn to deal with it. Our fathers are our first definition and demonstration for manhood. Our fathers. When I got married, and when Sandra, by God's miraculous hand, fell pregnant, I used to battle with thoughts saying, can I be a good father? Well, one thing I learned out is this: there is no such thing as a perfect father. And for all those who are new fathers, let me tell you, you will not be the perfect father. It's impossible. There's only one, and that's the Lord God Almighty. But what you endeavor to do is be honest, open, and humble with your children. When you make the mistake, be honest. When you haven't done the best, be honest, be transparent, because what you do is you teach your child how to do the same thing. If you teach your child that as a father you can't do any wrong, then your children begin to think that they can't do any wrong. My younger brother and I, when my dad particularly used to get drunk, he used to grab us and give us a lecture. And he would use this line, am I right or am I wrong? Well, we knew that if we said wrong, it was wacky-dooey. Does that make sense? Anyone had that area? Am I right or am I wrong? And he's a little intoxicated. Am I right or am I wrong? And I tell you, He used to get us all the time, but my little brother, see, I was the emotional one that would say, wrong, bang, you know what I'm trying to say? My younger brother was a schemer, okay? He was the schemer. Like, he would be passive-aggressive, right? I was more confrontational, wrong, bang, you know what I mean? But my younger brother, he's like, sure, you're right, Daddy, you know what I mean? But there was a trick in play, and I'll never forget, you know what I mean? We used to have the house with the roof tiles, and there was a big stack of roof tiles that kept the spares, you know what I mean? Those cement, concrete roof tiles. And my dad would get drunk, and he'd drag us out to show us his masculinity, you know what I mean? And for some reason in his midlife, he decided to do a martial arts thing or something, I don't know what. So whenever he got drunk on the fight, he'd be going, I'm taking his shoes off, because somehow there was more power with bare feet than shoes on. I don't know what it was. So anyhow, he'd bring us outside, and we'd see he'd set up a couple of bricks, and he'd put one of those cement tiles on top. And he'd go, what's my business, boys? You know what I mean? And, he'd hit it and break it. Now, this is where my little brother would get him back. He'd go, Dad, that's good. Can you do 2? He goes, of course I can do 2. And he'd put 2 on there. And I'm going, Craig. And he'd go like, stop it. You know what I mean? So this was Craig there. So he put 2 on. He goes, what's this? You know what I mean? He goes, bang. Oh, not too good. He hit it, bang, and he broke it. He goes, there. And Craig goes, I bet you can't do 3. You know what I mean? He goes, of course I can do 3. And he'd get 1. Well, the end of it speaks for itself. All right? So, but Craig figured he was more problems with his hand now than it was with us, so it worked out pretty good. But our fathers are our first definition and demonstration for men of the masculinity. So I can remember saying, God, can I be that father? Because of the impressions I had of my dad. But the thing that I learned in God is this, that God is the father of fathers. I hear men and women say, well, I find it hard to relate to God as a father because I had a bad father. I don't know what cloud you're on. I find it easy because I realize that he is the perfect father and my dad wasn't. So I find it a lot easier to step ahead than step down. And that's what's carried me through. So unfortunately, the roles of our father has caused many of us to equate masculinity with absence, irresponsibility, sullen silence, or violence. But God plants an infinitely curious mind within every child and adolescent. And as they grow older, many children bend to indifference. And when I use the word indifference, I'm meaning a lack of interest. And I see that when there has been a tragedy or difficulty in the upbringing, the children as they get older become indifferent. And indifferent means they lack interest. They lack interest in fathering. They lack interest in what the real role as being a male is. Or they come to the place of ignorance. And by ignorance, I mean there's formed a lack of knowledge. And there's an indifference, a lack of interest. There's an ignorance, a lack of knowledge. Others will surrender to scorn, which is the injustice, expression of injustice that is of contempt or to be put down and rubbished, or we are succumbed to what I would call a punishment to where we are unfairly chastised or corrected, not out of correction, but out of revenge or anger. And then I see them come into later years, whether it be in the later years of schooling, but in particular in the universities, where people finally succumb to what I call a formal education that quenches the hunger for knowledge. I've seen so many children grow up, and when they got into those early 20s and they went into formal education, I found out that they got so caught into that formal education that their hunger for knowledge was gone. I was reading a couple of quotes. I'm not saying they're the best quotes, but I used them, and it says this: formal education will make you a living, but self-education will make you a fortune. Now, I read this great article, and it says here, one of the greatest things about education is when you have a hunger to be self-taught. The only problem with the hunger to being self-taught is you know the meaning of the word, but you can't always pronounce the word. That's a pretty good area, okay, of saying it. In other words, your formal education can teach you so much, but life's experience in knowledge and understanding can take you so much further. Another statement I like is this: you could swim all day in the sea of knowledge and still come out completely dry. Most people do. Until you learn to absorb and take in and experience it, you miss out on the bigger picture. When I think of Mark chapter 10:14, which says, Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, don't stop them." I wonder what the Judean children perceived when this young rabbi, Jesus, rebuked his own disciples who were pushing the small ones from him. I wonder what went through their minds when Jesus spoke up and beyond and said, "Let them come to me." As a child, you might have grown up to where you thought you were a burden, or you might have grown up where you thought you weren't necessary or needed, or you might have grown up where you thought you didn't have a voice or something to say. But what you need to understand, that there is a bigger picture, an umbrella that's bigger, that is far more important, that you need to listen to no matter how old you are. And that message is that God has a purpose and a meaning for you, and instead of trying to push you away, he's beckoning you to come. I remember when I was thinking about this, being a new father, and I was reminiscing how my grandmother and father would say to me, children should be seen and not heard. My mother never held to that, thank goodness, so we probably nagged her ears off. Okay, or I did. But the fact of it, I said, how do I balance this with a child who was 4, 5, 6, 7 wanting to talk, especially when I was talking with adults? How do I balance it to where they don't become disruptive, but at the same time, they know that their voice is important to be heard? And we were living in America at that point, and I was going through this whole thing. How do I teach Josiah that he always has access to me, but at the same time, he can't be demonstrative. He can't be rude, or he can't just, when I'm talking, pull him on, dad, 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 dad. And so we instigated with Josiah, literally from the age of, around 2, a bit younger, that if he felt something was of importance, or if he wanted to contribute or say something, then either I was standing or sitting, and if I was talking to people, he would come to me, and there was a code we had that only I would understand, that those talking to me would not understand, meaning I'd be able to pause in my conversation and say, just one moment, please. I just need to talk to Josiah. And the code was really simple. And for some of you, perhaps as young parents, listen. It was real simple. If I was having a conversation, I was standing, he'd come up and he'd just touch my hand like this. If I was sitting, he'd just come up behind me and he'd put his hand on my shoulder, just like this. It was just like this, just a touch, just gentle, just my hand touch. And he knew, and we'd practiced this at home, he knew that that meant that I was aware he was there, that I would continue my conversation to where I could do a period, a stop. You say, just excuse me for 1 minute, and I could turn to Josiah and say, what is it, son? And then he would know that he was important enough for me to talk to him without it being a rude interruption. And then I'd answer him and go back to the conversation. Those I was interacting with never took it as an offense, but actually complimented us. Rather than the child pulling or jabbing or dad, 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 and making a demonstration. You see, it's all about us being hungry enough to be better in parenting. Now, Josiah is 27 years of age now. Making me feel older. And even though he's his own man, he's a husband, he's a father, and a minister in his own rights, it doesn't mean I've stopped being a father. But as I've said to you before, in his younger years, I would tell him, now I wait to be invited to say. Still fathering, still parenting. But my ultimate goal from the day he was this high to even now at 27 is this. I'm not here to be your best friend. A parent is never called to be the child's best friend. I'm here to be your father. You'll have many friends, and you perhaps will have a couple or so best friends. That's not my job. I'm not Shaun to you. I'm Dad. And I will be this to the day I die. Because that's what our children need. Your child doesn't need you to be their best friend. Your child doesn't need you to be their best fun. Your child needs you to be their father. As Paul said, you'll have many teachers, but you'll only have one father. Jesus spoke when he was a child in Luke 2, 46, 47. He entered the temple, and he spent 5 days listening and speaking with the leading religious leaders of the law when he was only 12. The Bible tells us in Luke 2, verse 47, that the scholars were astounded at the understanding and his answers. You know, if you want to know who someone is, listen to what they say. Jesus said in Luke 6:45, for his mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. Have you met someone that says, oops, don't know where that came from? It might have been a swear word. Oops, don't know how that came out. Oops, don't know where that came from. Or actually, here, the heart. For out of the mouth, the heart speaks. If you don't want to slip that odd word, it's not tying up your mouth more, it's dealing in here. So many times we can say parents didn't listen to us. But at the same time, we could also say that we're not listening to our children. The problem is we see today angry men. When I think about Melbourne right now, Victoria, and I think about among a certain people group from Africa who are in their early teenage years to where they're not being prosecuted as adults, are causing a major disturbance and threat and violence and robbery. I can think about Sydney, but at the same time I can think about here in our own state, in our own city, where there's certain areas of our city or our state where there is unruly behavior that's happening. I was talking to some politicians and to some well-meaning pastors who live on these satellite cities, like out at Yarrabilba or out at the Desert area in that direction. And they talk about how there is no infrastructure to be able to get the young people in and out for whatever, and how there's unruly groups coming together and causing disturbances. And there's this anger that seems to be prevalent more and more. I've never known a day where road rage is so out of control. And I'm not saying road rage wasn't here, but it seems to be getting more and more violent, more and more physical. I used to think it was only, don't take this wrong. I used to think it was only the United States of America where they'll go out and shoot something in the area. And thank goodness they're not with the guns, but they seem to be doing everything else, and people are still dying by being hit and pushed into traffic and being hit in the head with crowbars, and terrible, horrendous things are happening because in these young people in their early 20s, there seems to be this rage, this anger. And if you were to say to me what's happening, I would say to you it comes back to a lack of fathering. You know, statistics tell us, and people don't like me saying this, but I'll say it anyhow, that 80% of the children who are diagnosed with the attention, deficit disorder, around 80% of those who are identified in that area are male children. And 80% of those who are making the diagnosis are females. It's true. Little boys are different to little girls. I'm not saying it's not a real problem, so please. But what I am saying, there is something about the masculine child that is different from the feminine child. And when there's a problem at home, it comes in at school and so on. And if we don't learn how to better parent, if we don't learn how to better father, if we don't learn how to do this, see, you might be born a male, but that doesn't make you a man. You might be able to reproduce, but that doesn't make you a father. Even a dog can reproduce. Being a father is that maturity, it's that interaction, it's that idea not to say, well, this is how I was raised, but rather it's to say, I was raised, I was loved, but there's still more I can learn, and there's still more I can use, and there's still more that I can implement into my life. Read. Someone said to me, what should I read, Pastor? Whatever problem you're going through. I was talking to one minister 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me some personal challenges he's having in leadership. And I asked him, what are you reading? And he's talking to me about some bubbly, cute little lollipop book. I go, what are you reading that book for? Well, it makes me feel good. I said, it makes you feel good because that's where you're at. You need to read where you want to be. So you need to say what's wrong and go read in that area. When Josiah was about to get married, right, Gav? And I said to Sandra, I don't know how really to relate towards a daughter in love. So I went and bought a couple of books, or I asked this office to get me, a couple of books on how to handle a daughter. So I could understand the young lady's personality and emotions in a better way. Do I think that I excelled in it? No, but it helped me. It was only a little while afterwards that I learned how to manage it better with the areas of being sensitive and how to relate to it. So I would read to say I want to be more knowledgeable or more understanding how to deal with the area. If discipline's a problem in the home, read on it. If raising a child is difficult, read on it. If you're concerned about how to be a better father, read on it. But don't procrastinate, because it's the future that's coming that we need to be aware of. 1 Corinthians 13:11, Paul says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. Lisa, can you come up for me? Thanks. Jesus said in Matthew 15:18, what comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and this defiles a man. So many of us lose the ability to communicate during childhood. And then as adults, especially amongst the young males, they lose the ability to communicate as men. And there's something seriously dangerous that the childishness and behavior of a child that's not brought into check and dealt with when they become a man is dangerous. Because we're not talking about little shorts and little shoes and little hats. We're now talking about people who wear big suits, big clothes. They might not have a lot of this hair, but they can grow facial hair. They have biceps and have access to more liberty. And if we haven't learned how to deal with these hurts or breakdowns, then it comes up into a manhood where we come into dangerous times. Childish wisdom can be the most dangerous of all things, especially in the mind of a wounded adult. Childish wisdom is dangerous when it's in the mind of a wounded adult. I can't remember a time now where adult men have to give seriously thought just to walk through a gathering of teenage males. That teenage males from 15 to 18 seem to be more and more turning on adult males. It's almost like they're saying, you're the reason I'm like this. It's almost they're saying, I'm paying back for what my dad did to me. It's almost like they're saying, you said I couldn't speak, now I could, I'm not listening to you anymore. The disrespect to authority, the disrespect we see in school towards teachers. I find it in a situation that is dangerous. I love the book of Proverbs. And I tell especially the men that you should read a chapter of Proverbs every day. There's 31 chapters. The most days we have in a month is 31. Every day there's a chapter. Not that it's limited to men, but it was written by a man to his son. And it deals with alcohol. It deals with sexual desires. It deals with pride. It deals with money. It's a father telling his son that too much too soon is bad. In Ephesians 6:4, the Apostle Paul says this, fathers, do not stir up anger, or the old King James says don't exasperate. But it says, do not stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in training and instruction of the Lord. I see young men in anger and violence. And although they're not saying it, it's like their actions is saying to dads or to adult men, you're the reason I'm in a rut. You're the reason I'm in a rut. If we are to be the men we're meant to be in our marriage, with our children, in our workplace, in our community at large, then we have to stop being childish. We've got to be godly. We've got to learn to deal with the foolishness of our child upbringing and get healed. There's this, and I call it silly, but there's this silly TV show on. Married at First Sight. Anybody ever seen this one? Never seen it? You're giggling, so somebody said. Those of you who look like this haven't seen it. All right. Now, I got to confess to you, I've watched it. Okay. Am watching it. Okay. I record it so I can fast forward it because I couldn't sit through it if it was running normal. But what I like to do about this, and I was saying this to Sandra, and as far as I can see, that the people who are involved in this area are people, for whatever reason, couldn't find someone or brokenhearted, whatever it was. And I said to Sandra, you have these so-called experts, a relationship person, a psychologist, and I don't know who the other person is, okay? And they're all in the area, right? Maybe the other person thought they were a sex therapist or something, the way they talk. I mean, this is the three experts, right? And I said to Sandra, as I got to see the personalities, and I said to Sandra, you know, this is so typical of the world, that we don't want to address the past daddy issues. And so what we do is we bring it into adulthood. And the so-called professionals of this world try to match personalities or interests, desires, but they don't deal with the issues. You see, if I was a pastor in that area, and if I was on that group, and if we decided each one that was be in it, I would be demanding that each one of those people, before they're introduced, would go into a period of counseling for past experiences. There's one problem. One guy has no ability to have commitment. There's another person who's just gratifying themselves all the time. There's another one that's hurt by a broken relationship. They all need to go through counseling to get healing, because in the relationship, this is how it is. It's not like you just come as you are into a relationship, but you actually have suitcases. And in each suitcase, it represents the hurt, the pain, the upbringing, the interpretation. And we come into a relationship with these suitcases. When we meet the new person, we put the suitcases down, we talk, we hug, it all seems good. And then we say, where do I unpack? And we unpack, this is where anger goes. This is where mistrust goes. This is where fear goes. This is where sexual desire goes. This is where anarchy goes. This is where, and we unpack it. See, until we learn that there are issues we have to deal with, you can't do it. See, that's why just a Christian marriage is not enough. It has to be a marriage where we have learned to deal with that past to be able to come into the new. Let me finish with this. all that we are, speak and understand is relative to our childhood. I have gone through, I have been through, and I still work through issues of my childhood. That in no way is demeaning or putting one down. In the same way, my son will and does, because there is no perfect father except God the Father. But it's the openness and the willingness to say, these are issues I need to go through, I need to release. Someone said to me, why do I have to forgive all the time? And I said, it's not for their sake, it's for your sake, because if you can't forgive, you carry that with you to the next relationship. And sometimes we think that because we forgive, that there's an expectancy that they'll also forgive us. It doesn't happen always like that. In fact, most times it doesn't happen like that. You can say sorry and they'll say, so you should be. Then you feel insulted and you go back, well, I take it back. And they say, well, I never wanted it in the first place. Here's the issue, guys. We need to live in a way, that we can deal with things to let us move forward. You'll never understand who you are on the outside until you've touched a child within you. If I want to know who I am today, I have to be prepared to touch the inner areas of my childhood that said, why was I angry? Why did I battle with anger? Why did I battle with rage? Why did I battle with that area? And I got to dig and dig and dig. And it doesn't matter what decade I'm in life, in the 50s. I still dig in and go, why is there rage? And we can justify it, but you can't. Why is there rage? What issue ignites this rage? I mean, I'd have to say that these last several years, for me personally, have been the best years I've ever had. And I'm talking about where in myself, I feel a greater peace, a greater joy, and less annoyed than I ever have in my life. And I know it would be nice to say it was just one altar experience, but it's not true. It's that continuous desire, and this message is a result of it. It's a continuous desire saying, Lord, what is there in my life that I still need to be healed from? Wife, beware. Children, beware. Pastors, beware. Boss, beware. That if that man in your life, or that man in your fellowship, or that man around you is not open to deal with it, then that childishness will come through adulthood. And the difference between the child and the adult is the size and their freedom and their enormity. So, as Paul said, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, what? I put away childish things. Say that again. I put away childish things. So, I know, ladies, that you might well feel that this message has been directed pretty clearly towards men. And in many ways, it is. Because when men aren't godly, and even when men can be godly, they can really be pigs sometimes. Men can be brutal. Men can be rude, demanding, demeaning, uncaring, insensitive, desire to gratify self. You know, we as men have got to be different in the body of Christ. It doesn't mean we're perfect, God forbid. Some people think that Sandra and I can have the perfect marriage. Well, there's perfection, it's my wife. The imperfection is my part, okay? But the issue is this, okay? I'm not a perfect father, not a perfect husband, and not a perfect pastor. But I'm on a journey, and you're on it with me. So together we enjoy the journey. When we do well, we thank the Lord, and when we battle, we get before the Lord. But either way, we honor Him because we're on a journey. And I'm telling you, men, we've got to pick up our game, because there's an element in our own children that needs to be dealt with. And there's an element in the world's children that we need to reach. But if you don't get your own house starting in order, how do we reach this outside world? There was a day 40, 50 years ago that when someone got saved, okay, you taught them about the things of God. Today, when someone gets saved, You got to teach them how to say please, how to say thank you. You got to teach them how to have manners, how to have respect. Because the very value system that we had in society has decayed so much, it's no longer seen as normal. We are the new normal in Christ. Can you bow your heads right now? Father, in Jesus' name, this is my introduction to a new series. Now, the other weeks aren't going to be exactly like this, but this is the introduction. And it sets out to you my plan and my goal. So, men, I'm wanting you to come and be part of this 8-week journey with me. And ladies, you might want to try and encourage your man to be here. And men, you might want to invite other men. But here's the issue, men. Your life might have been better than mine. Your life might have been worse than mine. It's not relative. What's relative is how you've come out. What's relative is what's happened to you. You can come from the best Christian home and still deal with issues. The issue is, on this journey, are you allowing God to move in your life? Because if we as men won't bend our knee and be pliable like putty for God to mold, then we set a lid over our children. And we stop them from going to greater and higher levels. Father, I pray over men right now that they would be men. And it's manhood and Christ-likeness that is synonymous. You can't know manhood without Christ, because Christ is the epiphany of manhood, and it cannot be separated. You cannot know what it is to be a father unless you know what it is to be Christ-like. How we raise our children, how we teach our children values, how we raise them to know God. This is of such great value and importance. Whether there be newborns or in the wonderful twos, whether there be children, teenagers, adults, we need wisdom as men. And if you're in a relationship where you as a dad are no longer cohabiting with your family, don't forsake your children out of the hurt of the breakup. And remember this, fathers, the greatest gift you can give your children is to love your children's mother. Now, if you're divorced and separated, I'm not saying love in the context of a physical thing like you once had. But I'm talking about an agape love where you don't talk bad of them and you speak well of them. You must say they don't deserve it. Well, you don't deserve God's love either. But through grace as we receive, we give, and we do it because we want our children to know the balance. If you say to me, as a man, I need to put away childish things, would you stand to your feet right now? If there are things of childishness that you need to deal with as a man, stand up right now and say, yes, I am one. It reflects on our temperament. It reflects on our upbringing. It reflects on our hurts. Look, I'll be honest with you. I'm standing because I never want to say, church, that I have it all together. I think of Gabriel and myself, and Gabriel and I stand together as brothers. I feel close with Gabriel. And I stand together. He has a different upbringing in Romania, and I have here. But Gavin and I both feel the same way. You know, I'm a bit older than you, aren't I? A couple of years. But we both stand the same way, that we want to be better. And the first thing to it, right, Gav, is humility. It's saying, it's not that I think he's a wonderful dad, okay? I know he is. But it's us saying, there's still more we want to do. You know, we're grandfathers to the same grandson. And only God knows how many others, right? We're grandfathers to the grandson, and we play an important role. My son doesn't have a grandfather now. Okay? And there's no grandfather on your side too, right? So we especially know the burden and responsibility we have of our grandchildren, how our life is, right? So we're standing together in the same way. God, there's so much more. There's so much more. Father, I stand with these men, and first of all, I thank you for openness, humility, and a desire. It doesn't matter how old we are, whether we be 15, whether we be 80. We're saying, Lord, we want to deal with the issues that would rob us from the blessings of walking in you. Cover us, Lord, through the cross. And I know there are other men who want standing, and God's already shown me not so much the people, but just the spirit that doesn't want to acknowledge or take ownership. And this is the battle you're in, friend. Until you're prepared to humble and open and own it, you won't see that breakthrough. And it's like a wall you keep hitting and hitting and hitting and hitting. But until you take responsibility instead of blaming, you won't see that breakthrough that God so desires to give you. Lord, I speak it in your name. And all God's people said,